Welcome to The Vital Vagina, where we delve into brave and crucial conversations about the womb and feminine power. This podcast is not just for people with vaginas. We all come from the womb, and there is much for everyone to learn from this place of deep wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Cornelius. I'm a chiropractor and holistic pelvic care provider. I've been working in the feminine healing realm for nearly a decade, and I am honored to bring this work and these stories to light. Today's conversation is with Dena DeCastro. I have also known Dena for several years, and I'm so grateful to have her on this podcast and talking about cycles. So Dena is an astrologer, and so she teaches people how to become astrologers themselves, and she also provides astrological guidance. And I love her practical, grounded wisdom, and we have a really amazing conversation about the moon cycle and how it mimics the menstrual cycle and what that means and what we can do with that information. And then we talk a little bit about the book that she and I created together called Cycles of Wisdom. Well, hi, Dena. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm excited to have you on mine because I've been on your podcast before over the years.
Yes.
So it's going to be really fun to talk about the vital vagina from the perspective of astrological moon cycles.
Yeah, I think it will be very interesting.
Yeah. I can connect everything to vaginas, but
isn't everything connected back to vaginas?
Yeah,
ultimately?
pretty much.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy for me to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, I'm an astrologer, and I offer astrology readings, and I also offer mentorship and instruction in evolutionary astrology. And so evolutionary astrology is a specific branch of astrology that is focused on the connection between astrology and past lives, reincarnation, and also, there's definitely a bent toward healing through astrology and looking at our karmic past as it impacts the current life. And so there's that difference in approach from some other branches of astrology. And we're also very free will focused, meaning I really want to empower people with this knowledge, not scare them. Yeah. So I want to empower them by giving them information and then saying, well, here are the ways that you can take advantage of this information. Here are the things that you can do in your life with your free will choice to use the cycles to your benefit and to ride the cycles consciously rather than letting things happen to you and, fearing what's happening in the
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I love about astrology is it helps me personally sync myself up with the rhythm of what's actually happening. What energies are actually here and present versus always just trying to push my own agenda against all this energy. That's how it's helped me anyway.
Oh, I think that's such a great point. It's like we are always in a dance with the energies at play, right?
Yeah.
And to remember that those energies exist and to be conscious of what they are and how they're moving can really help us to work in alignment with them and to be somewhat humble too. It's like, okay, we're not completely in control of everything,
Yeah.
I mean, and so when I say we have free will, I don't mean that we have total control, right?
Right.
We have the ability to act within the conditions that we're given.
Yeah.
But it's good to know what those conditions are.
Yeah.
And to be willing to surrender to some of that flow and also to consciously choose a different direction if we need to.
Yeah. I'm personally going through a lot of Uranus transits right now. And so I could choose to be my normal Virgo Taurus self and just pretend like that's not happening and not go with it, or feel like I'm victim to a lot of changes that are happening suddenly.
Sure.
But I
knowing about astrology really helps me go, oh, right, this is happening on purpose. Like, this is for me, not like against me, because this is the time I'm in, and this is what I'm supposed to be going with change right now.
Exactly. And I think that awareness of cycles, and that's a lot of what we'll probably be talking about today, is how astrology is just another representation of nature's cycles.
Yeah.
And knowing what part of the cycle you're in and the duration of the cycle, like how long is it going to last? That's so helpful, especially when you're in a challenging or stressful time.
Yeah.
Like your Uranus transits are uncomfortable often especially for earth sign types, because we like stability. I'm a moon and Taurus person too. We like stability, we like security, we like things to be somewhat routine, for our emotional sustenance. And so when there's so much unpredictability, and Uranus can bring sudden and surprising changes, and things getting shaken up, it could be really disconcerting. But the fact that that is happening, and also that it's not going to last forever. Like, this is just, like a year and a half is about the average length of a Uranus transit, which can seem like a long time. But, you won't be going through it like every second of that. But it can help you to get perspective on the fact that, okay, this is temporary. It's going to have its season, and then you can embrace it more, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like ride the wave a little, have some fun.
Yeah. It's like do something out of your comfort zone so that, you stretch yourself a little bit, and then you can come back to resting Taurus face.
Yeah.
When it's all over.
Yeah. Take a little rest, like a little Taurus nap afterwards.
Yeah. We're going to need one, I have a feeling.
I think so. Yeah. Well, let's see. When you and I first met, I had my little studio on Foster Road, and I was doing lots of workshops. There, and hosting lots of different people, and you came and taught a workshop following the moon. So you were teaching people how to like follow the moon cycles. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this is a practice that I have done for most of my adult life, just following the lunar phases. And even before I was a professional astrologer, I did this. I was in touch with what phase is the moon in? Are we in a new or full moon? What does that mean for me? And so I got really attuned to working with the lunar cycle. And I think, that was so helpful for me in terms of understanding why I might be feeling a certain way. Like at the new moon, or even just before the new moon, we often can feel a dip in energy. And we're at that point now. I'll just point out the cycle,
Yeah.
So for people who will be listening later, like this will come around again, but notice at the balsamic moon, which is just before the new moon, we tend to feel this real dip in energy, can feel tired or fatigued for some people who are very sensitive to the lunar cycles. And it is a time to go within, right? And then the full moon is the peak of energy. So we feel that kind of crazy, buzzy, frenetic energy more in the collective. And so I was just really noticing new and full moon at first in my own life. And then I started to refine it more and notice the cross points, the half moons and the crescent moons and those cycles. But how I've used it in my daily life is noting when to start things, like when to kick things off. And I try to shoot for new moon to first quarter moon phase, is a good time to do that, because it's the waxing or building energy, the energy of new beginnings. And then to really focus on things where I need, or to schedule things where I need a lot of energy at or around the full moon, where I'm going to have to do a big push or put it out there. And when I'm more inclined to be energized. And so this moon cycle is just a real basic, constant rhythm that's always going. It's always something you can tap into. And so that's why I started to think about teaching it. It's just like, it's so beautifully simple. It's always there. it's ever present, and we can always tap into and connect to it, just like divine feminine energy, which I really think the moon is a representative of. We can always go back to it for nurturing and sustenance in our lives. And then there's another layer to it that I bring in my teaching, which is the moon through the signs, the astrological signs. And so that's, for example, the moon being in Scorpio, right now, for example, the moon is in Scorpio. And what that means is that the mood takes on the flavor, of the astrological sign that it's in. So there's two things really to consider always in terms of the moon's energy and how it's affecting us is what is its lunar phase and what sign is it in? And those things can always be lining up differently. Those are two independent cycles that are overlapping, the zodiac wheel progression and then the lunar phases.
This is what I love about astrology is how technical it can be and how endless it is.
Yeah.
Like how many layers there are. I think I've been studying astrology just as an amateur since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have phases where I've gone in and out for sure, but it's just endless. Like the part of me that loves data and patterns just loves astrology because first you kind of like you have to wrap your mind around just the full moon and the new moon, and that's enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it kind of goes down and it drills down into all this other layers, and then you start to realize how infinite it really is and how much of a fingerprint we all really are, and just these complex patterns, how they weave together is so fascinating.
It is very complex, and that's one of the things that I strive to communicate to people is, yes, it's complex, and I try to make it more understandable. I mean, there are ways to make it more understandable or to strip down some of the noise, that's there in astrology. For example, if it's too overwhelming for people to think about signs, the moon through the signs, I would just tell them, focus on the lunar phases, focus on, if it's too much for you, just focus on the new and the full moon. Like that's going to give you enough to work with, really. Or just knowing whether the moon is, waxing or waning.
Yeah. So most people are ignoring that altogether and not paying attention even just to the waxing and waning. So that's enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you do a great job making it sound. Anytime I send somebody to you for astrology, they come back and tell me like, oh, she just made it make so much sense.
Oh, that's so good to hear.
Yeah.
I love that. That's my whole goal is to make this really complex system more understandable. I mean, I don't think, like you said, it's unending. There's never, we never will master, nobody's ever a master of astrology because there's so much to know and there's so much to learn always. And there's a lot of jargon, involved in it too. So yeah, that's my goal, to really make it more understandable for people. Absolutely.
Yeah, you do good with that. So let's see, you taught that class at my studio, and then we started kind of becoming inspired to create a little ebook or workshop type thing for people, because we acknowledged that there's like a metaphorical connection between the moon cycles. Well, it's more than metaphorical actually, but the moon cycles and then the menstrual cycle.
Yes.
They mimic each other in their patterns.
Right.
So we wanted to come together and really teach people how connected these cycles actually are. And that's what helps make it simple when you start to realize like, oh, this is, it's not all these individual cycles, really. It's like they're all connected and they're so similar and they mimic each other. So the menstrual cycle is very similar to the moon cycle. When we're ovulating, it's like having the full moon.
Yeah.
Everything, we have more energy, things are more like just vibrant. We're a little bit more in our masculine, going out into the world energy, quote unquote masculine. And during the time when we're actually bleeding is like the new moon energy.
Yes.
And it happens in the same, like on average 28-day kind of patterning, just like the moon. So there's such connection between the female menstrual cycle, the female body and the menstrual cycle to the moon cycles.
Yes. Absolutely.
So yeah.
And that is the mystery, isn't it? Why?
It is. Yeah, right. There's been studies that I've seen some studies that show how we're connected and others that say we're not. I've read a whole lot about this, and a lot
Yes.
of it has to do with the light, and how we do artificial light now has kind of interrupted the pattern a little bit, but the pattern seems to be strong enough
Mhm.
that it's still, most women will still sync up a lot of the times to actual moon.
Yeah.
So some women will sync up their bleeding time to the time that the new moon is happening. And other women will sync up actually and bleed during the full moon sometimes.
Right.
Just kind of switch it. And there's a lot of complication to it. But overall, I think it's really good for people in general to really understand how these two energies are very connected, whether you are menstruating or not.
Absolutely. And even whether you're female or not, that, men and women and any, gender identification can use the lunar cycles. It's not an inherently feminine exclusive cycle. Let's put it that way.
No. Yeah. It's a cycle that shows us how to use feminine energy.
Yes.
I would say. Yeah.
Right. And it is, that's one question I have for you. And you have done a lot of reading and study on this. It's like, what is that connection? So you say it has to do with light, and it has to do with maybe back before there was artificial light, we were just more attuned to, women would sleep in the moonlight or something, and then they might, have more access to that. So what is that connection between our bodies and the moon and how that works?
It has something to do with how light hits us and affects our pituitary gland, which is the gland that is like the regulator of all of the hormones in the body.
Yeah.
So it has to do with our brain body connection.
Okay.
Also, and then it has to do with how much light. And you're right. It's about how we used to sleep under the stars a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
If you go really far back, and so we would get more of the sunlight actually during the full moon.
Right.
And that would change the way that would shift the hormones a little bit. So yeah, it's complicated. I will be sure to look for some of those, some of the write-ups on some of that and see if I can add it to the show notes for people who want to go deeper. And maybe I could even find somebody who is like an expert in this and bring them onto the podcast, which would be pretty fun.
That would be fascinating. Yeah. Because that's a question I get a lot is, why does that happen? Why does this happen?
Yeah.
Well,
the bigger reason is because we're part of nature.
And that is the short answer. Yeah. I mean, we are connected to nature, and this is the most clear evidence, is our connection to the moon. Not just women's connection to the moon, but as a species, we are connected to the moon. It affects our energy. It affects our mood, both male and female. It affects how we perceive life. And, it affects there's also that theory that the moon affects the tides, and we are so much water, in our own makeup, that it affects us in that way as well. So
that's too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're connected more than we're willing to really acknowledge, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
And our culture, a lot of people are talking about this now, but our culture has become kind of hyper or toxic masculine. And that's not saying that it's males are negative, because females run a lot of hyper masculine energy in their bodies too. And this more cyclical rhythm and attunement with nature is the medicine that brings in more of that, like that deeper feminine energy. And when I talk about feminine and masculine energy, and we'll talk about this a lot on this podcast over different episodes, but I'm talking about energies. So they really go together, like we were talking earlier about a dance.
Mm-hmm.
They work together, and you can't actually separate them. But like, if you look at it even from the perspective of hormones, for example, like when people have like thyroid issues, like are very common, you can become hyper or hypo, too much or too little. So hypo is too little flow, and hyper is too much. And then that they're both dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for the balance between them. So you can do the same with masculine and feminine energy. And feminine energy is not like high heels and makeup and stuff like that.
Right.
I think that's part of the play of the feminine, the creativity.
Sure.
But I think that what we think of as feminine often is like through the lens of our hypermasculine culture.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking about feminine energy, I'm really coming back down into what's this rhythm in the body, and what's this rhythm of the earth, and that to me is extremely like feminine.
Yeah.
That the cyclical patterns we in our Cycles of Wisdom little ebook that we created, also we talk about how the seasons of nature also mimic the same waxing and waning pattern. Yes. We see it when we go from winter to summer and back down to winter again.
Right.
And everything in between. And so we're really talking about just bringing that rhythm back in to balance the linear, that quote unquote hypermasculine linear way of just driving forward and not noticing patterns and not noticing seasons and not honoring where we're at. Well, and I think that's where a lot of our trouble has come from.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you mention in the ebook is, that is not a sustainable way of moving through the world, that the hypermasculine model, it would be like, having a full moon energy all the time. We don't have a full moon energy all the time for a reason. Yeah. The cycles are telling us literally, through their wisdom, that we need periods of rest and downtime. And we need periods of non-productivity, and we need periods of going inside. And that really was a huge point where we came together, in our work around these cycles, is realizing that this is something that the culture does not embrace, and that the culture needs really bad right now as medicine, that, we're not meant to be just producing, doing, forever. There's a beauty to that part of the cycle. It's not that it's bad, but it has its moment. And then there's a waning, the waning energy is the dying off, the falling away, the going inside, the retreat, because we need to restore the energy so that we can move into a new cycle and do it all over again.
I think that this rhythm helps us become more mindful as well, because when we are just constantly pushing forward, we don't stop to think about like, is this direction I'm heading in actually makes sense? Is it sustainable? Is it harmful?
Yeah.
Or am I just producing for the sake of producing, for the sake of accomplishment? And that's it.
Right. I mean, I think that's such a huge point. I would say in my readings, over the past few years, one of the biggest things that I say to people over and over again is, especially to women, I will note, and more of my clients percentage wise are women, but so maybe that's part of it too. But I am saying this a lot to women, that you don't have to always be doing. Where are you scheduling time for rest and retreat? It seems so simple, but you'd be amazed. No, you wouldn't be, because you have it in your practice too. It's like how many women are like, oh yeah, I really don't allow myself, whatever the phrasing is, I really don't allow myself to do that. I feel like I have to be doing stuff all the time, and there's always something to do, right?
Yeah. I think women and people who identify more with feminine energy tend to become a little bit, it's interesting. In my experience, males and more masculine people are actually a little bit better at getting their needs met. In my opinion, like they're a little bit better often at like taking the rest when they need it, or being like, no, I'm tapped out.
Yeah.
But the females and the feminine, I think because our culture is so hyper masculine, like we've tried really, really hard to be like, I'm going to be equal and I can do it all too. And I'm just going to push through how I'm feeling. Like we've almost ignored ourselves even worse.
Yes.
In some ways. And so out of a urge to like overcompensate. And I really hope that we start to shift that, because I don't know, the more I pay attention to cycles and actually follow what I preach, I actually become more productive during the times I'm supposed to be producing.
Yeah.
And then like overall, I've become more productive and way less stressed out. And I have no problem taking, like, if it's a new moon week, I'm gonna take some stuff off my calendar if I need to, and I feel inspired. Like if I'm not feeling inspired to do the doing, I'm not gonna do it. Or if I'm bleeding, same thing. I will have no problem taking the day off, or like doing something else, or having it be lower energy, or shifting what's going on. And then I've become much more productive, and in a way that's more in alignment with my purpose and what kind of work I need to be doing in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's and I know for you too, it is a continual work in progress, to live that way. I mean, I definitely try to practice what I teach, and I do practice what I preach a lot of the time, but it's on a daily basis. I will have to talk to myself and say, okay, check in with your body. What is your body really wanting and needing to do right now? Are you pushing through a feeling of tiredness to just, get some things done? Do they really need to get done right now? I have those conversations with myself almost every day. And it does root back to this awareness of the cycles that I'm so glad that I have, because not only is there the lunar cycle to consider, there's my body cycle, right? Which may or may not be lined up. And that's something to mention too, that, we can sync up to the moon cycles, but often we don't, and we can even be flip flop. Like, I'm not personally on a regular cycle, so it just changes all the time of, whether I'm aligned with the moon or not. And so can you speak a little bit about that? Like, how can a woman work with it if she's not synced up, or is it's not inherently better or worse to be synced up or not, right?
Yes, I think it's important to kind of look at the cycle itself as kind of abstract. So it's both and. So it's something that is within our bodies, and it's also kind of an abstract pattern. And we're talking about the average pattern, and every woman who menstruates every person who menstruates is really different. So especially now in our culture.
Yeah.
So part of it's the fact that we're all unique, and the other part of it is the fact that our culture is off balance with the cycles of nature, and so things are a little wonky. But what I like to remind people is the menstrual cycle specifically is what is responsible for creating life.
Yeah.
So,
there's some
wisdom in that cycle.
Yeah.
And it's for all people. We all come from this cycle.
Yes.
We all come from this body that makes this cycle happen. And so there's wisdom for all of us, including males, including people who identify as male or female or anything in between or outside of, and females, whether you are in alignment with the moon cycle or not. So like, I personally am pretty irregular and always have been, and I'm like fine with it. My body and I are happy with the way I cycle. And, however, there are times when I'm definitely not bleeding during the new moon, but I'll be like, and before I was really focusing and really before I have had embodied actually following these cycles, I'd be like, why is my energy so tired this week? I have so many things to do. And then I would be like, oh, it's new moon and we're in the middle of winter. So of course I'm feeling low energy and probably shouldn't push through right now. Because one of the things I've also learned is when you actually contain your energy, even when you're inspired to keep working during the new moon or the menstrual time, you actually, if you contain that energy a little bit, you'll have more energy during the full moon when then everything's like present for you. So it's wise to actually follow this. And so what I always tell people, whether they're in perimenopause, whether they're in menopause, whether they've had hysterectomy, whether they have a male body, and so they don't menstruate, I just say, follow the moon. Just follow the moon and follow the seasons. And you can sync yourself up to that. You can be like the straightest man and still get a lot of use out of following these monthly rhythms that are responsible for creating life.
Yeah, I would say yes. And I mean, because it is all about our connection to nature, connecting to our bodies, connecting to the lunar cycle, connecting to the solar cycle, any of it is connecting back to nature and what we're made of. And, the life
and you're
force.
Right. It's the key to sustainability, which is what we need. Like, we've gotten to this point where we've sucked all the resources out of the earth, and like things are really off balance, and the earth is giving us all these signs that things are not sustainable. Like, we have to change, and the change is coming back to that sustainable, cyclical, earthy rhythm.
Yes. And something I find too about following these cycles, whether it be astrological cycles or my body cycle or the moon cycle, when I do that consciously, I feel really grounded and peaceful. Like
Yeah.
it calms me down. We can get so lost in the chaos out there, just going online or, go online for 5 minutes and you'll feel the chaos.
Yeah.
And just the noise of our culture. And so we need more things like this that help us to quiet down, calm down, get centered, get back in your body. Look at the moon. Like I tell people this because they don't, sometimes connect the moon on paper, to the moon in the sky. It's like actually sitting and looking at the moon at night is a practice to bring you back to connection to your body and to nature. It's so simple. Again, you wouldn't think you would have to tell people like spend some time looking at the moon, but
Yeah, I know.
I think we are forgetting, I have a feeling because I forget sometimes myself, it's like, I could do it one night in the summer, I sit there and I think, wow, I should do this more often. Like I sit here and look out at the crescent moon setting. And then, 6 months later, I'm doing it again. And I think, wow, that's not very often that that I am making myself do this. So that's the kind of thing I try to impart to people through this awareness of connection to the moon and the cycles. Is like, yeah, there's also the real visual, physical component to it that we can look in the sky and see the stars and see the moon and remind us that we're connected to that.
Yeah, and it can be hard when you live in a city to actually see it.
Absolutely.
I know I grew up in a more rural areas, and so I took for granted how much you could see, like the moon and the stars.
That's a big deal.
And a huge deal. And things solidified me even more when I moved into a house that was more up on a hill, and I have a view, like I can see the moon most of the time. It's very obvious, and I'm like, oh, it's so much easier to actually click in with that when I can see it all the time.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So sometimes you have to go out of your way to like really, and I think I agree. I think it's really important to actually, a lot of people are like, how do I find out what phase the moon's in? And I'm like, look in the sky.
And sometimes it's not visible, and there's that too.
Yeah. And there's calendars, and I think the calendars are useful. Like Google has a section that you can just check or like import a little calendar that'll tell you the moon phases.
Yep.
There's apps on your phone that'll tell you the moon phases and where it's at astrologically even.
Yeah, that's true.
I used a lot of those at first especially, but I also really tried hard to link it up to like just looking at it. And then it took me a while to actually learn, this is when it's waxing and this is when it's waning and this is what shape it's in. And it changes all the time. And when you start really paying attention to it, it's kind of fun to watch.
Well, I can even speak to that a little bit here, give that little tidbit. So if you look in the sky and you actually see the moon at night, if it is on the right side of the curve, I call it the DOC method. So if it's forming more of a D, like it's either the half moon of the D or the crescent D, moving to the half moon D, then that is waxing. Okay. It's building. And then it will build past the half moon point, what we call the gibbous phase, which is looks like a little pregnant moon, with more of it being filled out on the right side. That right side curve is still there, and then it's starting to bulge to the left. And that's pregnant gibbous moon, which is the waxing still. And then the full moon is obvious. It's the O shape, right? And then as it starts to decline, it goes from right to left as it wanes. So it's going to start disappearing from the right and then going to the left. And so when you see that happening, when you see the C forming on the left-hand side, that's the waning moon phase. Down to, the last little crescent sliver is like going toward balsamic phase, the last phase before new moon. And then new moon, you don't see a moon. You don't, because it's with the sun, you can't see it.
Yep.
So that's a really quick way to identify visually what phase the moon is in. And like I say, it's not always possible. You won't always see the moon, but if you can, there are some ways to figure it out. Yeah.
Aw, thank you.
Yeah.
This was awesome. And I feel like we could probably keep talking for hours.
I know, we always can.
So I reminded listeners with the last person I interviewed that she would also probably be a regular guest, and I have a feeling you will too.
Aw.
I want a few people especially to be regular, because I feel like the astrology and the moon stuff, I think there's so many layers and lots of ways that we can tie this back in. So I want to keep going into deeper places with all of this. So I hope that you'll come back.
Oh, absolutely.
And we can do this on a kind of regular basis.
I would love to.
Yay. And then I want everyone to know, Dena and I wrote a little ebook, and it's not that little. It's like 44 pages.
I was going to say, it's not really little.
And there's like 4 videos that we created these graphics, and the videos kind of show the graphics are kind of moving a little bit, so you can actually see these cycles, and we go over 4 different cycles. So we go over the menstrual cycle, the moon cycle, the seasonal cycle, and like the yearly, the annual, or the whole life cycle of a female.
Mm-hmm.
And how they're all connected and how they're kind of fractals of each other. And so, we did it in a real simple beginner kind of way. So it's really great for people who've never like really delved into any of this before and don't really maybe understand astrology or haven't followed the moon. And we did this a few years ago, and we're pretty proud of our little work, and we're going to be doing some updates to it soon. But for now, it's this nice little introduction to how these cycles work and what the wisdom of these cycles are. It's called Cycles of Wisdom, and you can find it at www.cyclesofwisdom.com. And I would like, Dena, for you to let us know where people can find you if they want more information about you, or how to take your classes to learn astrology or to get readings from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am at DenaDeCastro.com. And there I have, if you do go to my homepage and sign up for my list, I do have a free gift right now that is a booklet on the lunar nodes. So it is tied into the moon, but it's on the north and south node of the moon, and it's called Your Karmic Past and Your Life Purpose. And so you can get that free download by going there. I also have offer mentorships, one-on-one astrology mentorships, and you can find out more about that at the site, and my individual readings, which I'm doing all the time. So please feel free to check that out.
Highly recommended, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Your readings always help me orient so much.
I'm so glad to hear it. And your healing always manages to realign me. I just had an adjustment with you yesterday that was amazing. So,
thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find show notes at vitalvagina.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and share with your friends. We'll be back next week with another episode.